Self-disclosure and immediacy are challenging skills and have been described in separate programs in this series. The skill of confronting is another high-level challenging skill worthy of focus. Of all the counseling skills, confronting is perhaps the most anxiety-provoking for nurses. It is difficult, but with practice can be an effective tool. Because of the negative associations with the term confrontation, it may be helpful for you to substitute the term challenging. What do we mean by the term confronting as it applies to counseling? Confronting is described as drawing the client's attention to discrepancies in his verbal or nonverbal behavior. It is also described as helping him to identify not only discrepancies, but also distortions which may keep him from making effective changes in his life. What is typically confronted is the client's attitudes, ideas, beliefs, or behaviors. Egan describes confronting as challenging the client to develop new perspectives on his problems or on his life, and challenging him to change his behavior, both internal and external, even when he is reluctant to do so. Confronting can also be effective when the client circles round and round in his conversation, when he's stuck, in other words. Bernard identifies a number of additional situations in which confronting can be helpful. For example, when the client uses negative statements about himself. I'll never be able to trust her again. Another example is when the client uses games in the relationship. For instance, responding with yes, but to every suggestion the nurse makes. A final example is when excuses are predominant in the client's responses. Bernard identifies 4 typical excuses. Complacency. For example, the attitude that it won't happen to me. Rationalization. For example, downplaying a behavior. Procrastination. For example, putting off acting on the problem in any way. And passing the buck. For example, ascribing the need to change to another person in the client's life. Now let's look at some scenarios to illustrate the principles of confronting. In the first scene, Alex, who has had problems with alcohol abuse, has been telling the nurse about how he has quit drinking on the advice of his doctor.
I know it's difficult, but do you get out very often with your friends?
Yeah, I get out, maybe once, twice a week, a couple of times a week, just go out, have a game of pool, and maybe have a beer or two. It's fun.
Wait a minute, I'm confused. Earlier you told me that you had stopped drinking 2 months ago, and now you just said that you were out drinking with your friends.
Yeah, no, it's not. I just have 1 or 2 beers. It's not like before. Before I'd go out, I might have 8, 9, 10. Who'd count? But I don't do that anymore.
I guess it's difficult where drinking was such a big part of your life.
Yeah, well, these are my friends. I've hung out with them all my life. That's the type.
Here, the nurse points out a discrepancy between what Alex had told her earlier and what he is saying now. Note that the nurse begins by a response occurring within herself. I'm confused. Then she clearly and concisely states what her confusion is about. The confrontation, in other words. Note that confronting is not judgmental, but rather a factual statement of an observation the nurse is making. Note also that her tone is gentle. Alex responds somewhat defensively, and the nurse responds with an empathetic statement. He then begins to discuss his struggle with drinking. In scene 2, the nurse is talking with June, who had found out that her 15-year-old daughter has been dealing drugs at her school. And she's been telling the nurse about her need to talk with her daughter about this discovery.
My daughter Tina's been dealing in drugs, and I'm really concerned. I know I have to confront her about this, but I'm just waiting for the time to be right.
I wonder, are you afraid to confront her because you're fearful of how she may react?
I'm really worried about how she'll react. I'm really afraid. I'm afraid she might run away from home, or I'm not sure what she'll do. It really concerns me.